Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. So Fresh Red Kills are the videos where I talk about the books that I've recently finished reading. And I'm going to be talking about two books that I finished reading in the beginning of September. So we have two history books. I read these for Q3 of Historathon 2025. Historathon is a year-long reading event where we read, celebrate, and discuss nonfiction history. We divide the year up into quarters, each quarter looking at a different time period. There'll be information for all of that down below if you're interested. And yeah, so I chose these two. This one I had also committed to. I made a video a few weeks ago about unread books, and this is one of those books I've been sitting on my shelf for years that I've been meaning to get to, so I committed to reading this within 90 days, and I got this one done. But first I'll talk about this. This is Nathaniel Philbrick's Travels with George, In Search of Washington and His Legacy. This is actually the first thing that I've read by Nathaniel Philbrick. I do have a couple of his books on my shelves, but I just haven't read them yet. And I'm a sucker not just for history, but also travelogues. And I love the combination of those things. One of my favorite writers before he passed away was Tony Horwitz. He did things like Confederates in the Attic and A Voyage Long and Strange. And I just love his combination of history and travel and journalism. So I was kind of hoping this would scratch that itch as well. And for the most part, it did. I didn't just read this. I also did listen to this on audiobook. Nathaniel Philbrick reads it. So sometimes I was, in my car listening to it, and then I come back. The thing is, I'm clarifying because I never just listen to a book. I always only listen to audiobooks that I have a physical copy of, because even if I listen to a section, I like to go back and kind of skim the pages and see all the images. If I, have questions about it, I like to go back to the page and try and seek it out. Sometimes I will alternate and do immersive reading, where I'll just sit down for a while and listen to the book while I read it. So I take audiobooks often as an opportunity to try and read and reread in I think, a fairly timely fashion. So yeah, he is essentially following Washington's path after Washington was inaugurated as president. He did several tours. Basically, he went through New England, he went through Long Island, he went down south, and this was a new president who was basically trying to unite the country. Sections of the country that were very different from one another, people not knowing exactly what kind of person he was, whether they can trust him. All of that sort of went into it. So Washington went on this tour, and if you're in the U.S. on the East Coast, there are so many places like George Washington slept here. People kind of wear it as a badge of honor on their property. But it's true, he did sleep in a lot of places. But this kind of gets to the heart, I guess, of why that sort of thing is significant. One of the things that Nathaniel Philbrick is doing, he's following the path. So he's talking about what Washington did, and he's also talking about what he is doing in following that path. What does it look like today? What sorts of things did he find? What sorts of people did he talk to? Is there any remnant of that legacy to be found? But he's especially looking at Washington trying to unite. Getting at the heart of what Washington was really trying to do. And I think his view of Washington is pretty balanced. He is not overly fawning. He's also not overly critical when Washington is, despicable, and there are a few times that he is. He definitely calls him out on it. But you can also sense a certain amount of admiration that Washington, despite some of his foibles, he really did have the nation's interest at heart. He was trying to unite. He was trying to bring together all these sort of disparate, former 13 colonies. And his efforts were pretty admirable. He had a very kind of even keel attitude for the most part. There were a few times he lost his temper, but not as much. So his approach is something that Nathaniel Philbrick appears to think that we can learn from. Now, this was published 2021. Now, you can't help but read Washington and what he did, what we believe he thought, what he was trying to accomplish, and compare it to what's going on in the United States today. I think Philbrick, he he sort of hints at seeing, these sorts of things coming, or at least, what happens when somebody in the executive office does not have the interest of the country at heart, its best interest, and is much more self-serving. So you can't help but read this and just think, wow, a slaveholder from the 18th century tends to have more decency than a 21st century politician. And yeah, I did think that this was interesting, and I enjoyed it. But yeah, so we've got Travels with George in Search of Washington's Legacy by Nathaniel Philbrick. And like I said, I followed that up with this. Undaunted Courage, Meriwether Lewis, Thomas Jefferson, and the Opening of the American West by Stephen Ambrose. And this was published, I think, in the 90s. Let me just double check. Yeah, 1996. And this is a very well-known book. I'm just super late to the party. And I'd never heard a bad thing about it, and I can see why. It is very good. I wasn't sure exactly going into it exactly what I should be expecting. So this really is very much a biography of Meriwether Lewis. I wasn't sure what the focus was going to be or how it was going to be approached, but really we're looking at Meriwether Lewis's life. And of course, Thomas Jefferson is a part of that, but Lewis is the focus. Clark is there, of course, but only as it relates to Lewis. So we go through Lewis's early life, his career, his working for Jefferson, when Jefferson, early on in his presidency, and then eventually, of course, the expedition, the Corps of Discovery, which, I think I'm maybe overemphasizing the point, or going too far with my connection, but I couldn't help but think of the Corps of Discovery and this kind of very Enlightenment approach to their travels, to almost like a precursor to something like Star Trek. Now, they weren't purely out for exploring. They were looking really for commerce, but they had this scientific, very much Enlightenment attitude as they went through. They were, and Mary Lewis was very good at it, documenting the wildlife and the flora and the fauna. And we get a little bit of a, at times, we get some anthropology as well, looking at the Native Americans and their various societies. And Lewis at times makes mistakes. He's certainly a man of his time period, but in many other ways, he's quite admirable and makes some excellent calls. And there are just some really interesting, and exciting moments throughout the journey. Now, we follow all of that, and I think that Ambrose really kind of paints a pretty vivid picture. I mean, you feel like you're there a lot of times. You feel like you can see it all happening right before you. The landscape and what the people are doing, what they're wearing. Ambrose just does a really good job with that. And I knew that Lewis sort of died young. I didn't exactly know how he passed away. So because it may not be common knowledge, I'm not going to get too into the details. But, you have this sort of triumphal feel when the expedition is done, but the book's not over. You still got quite a bit to go through the rest of Lewis's, unfortunately, fairly short life. And it gets pretty depressing and tragic as it goes. So the book really kind of ends on a downer, more than I expected. But nevertheless, I was very happy reading this, and I thought it was great. This is, I think, my second book that I've read by Ambrose. I had read last year, Band of Brothers, so I'll probably try and read an Ambrose each year, just try and catch up with some of the other ones that I own. I do have Citizen Soldiers, and I think D-Day. I think I have both of those. I do know that some of his work is not as good as others, that there have been some issues with some of the scholarship or plagiarism. I'm going to sort of stay away from those for the most part, but the stuff that I've heard good stuff about, I am going to try and read. So, yeah, read this, my second book this month for quarter 3 of Historathon 2025. I mostly read nonfiction this month, but I think I only read nonfiction this month if I'm remembering correctly. So these are at least the first two. So yeah, that is Travels with George, In Search of Washington's Legacy, and Undaunted Courage, Meriwether Lewis, Thomas Jefferson, The Opening of the American West. If you've read either of these, love your thoughts, and as always, Thank you, BookTube.